Hello, Blake Bruning here from Trinity Whip Company, and me and Steve Townsend are just finished up a rush order on 4 6-foot Indiana Jones style bullwhips for stage props, just to kind of take care of it. And I thought I would go ahead and use this opportunity to kind of explain some of the things with the handles that we tend to do with these whips to kind of give them a small variation. And by we, I guess I really mean me, Blake Bruning. But I believe Joe does similar things, and different reasons. There's different specs on what people think a Raiders whip is. Like this, first of all, let's just look at the hide. I like to use these hides. I like to use a natural for, Raiders, and then they kind of use some of the same whips from Raiders in TOD, but even though chronologically it's earlier, they were darker, and the whips they got, they're darker. So I tend to usually make this one a darker whip like in the movies, and so this is the TOD, or what I call the Fortune and Glory, Temple of Doom, but this one is the Last Crusade, and I put these in all whiskeys. They're a lot darker, and again, I think a couple of the ones that might even been on the set here, and then, might have the old ones, but they kind of darken them up. And so I make these all whiskey. These knots will darken up the match a little bit. And this one, this is what I do is for my Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls. And basically, other than, when Jacka did the whips, he didn't know what he was making when he was making them for the movie, but he does 7.62 pass. Like the knots, these are usually what you call 5.43 passes. See 1, 2, 3 passes. And this is a different knot, but they use this a lot in Australia, the 7.6s. And so the knots are a little different. And they actually used a 4-strand wrist loop that was a little longer so it could tie in a knot, not be in your way so much when you're not using wrist loop. Most people don't use a wrist loop when they're whipping it. But I like to use whiskey on this with brandy knots, and the lighting may not be good enough to see the difference. But this, when it was sit in, I believe was either they were all saddle tan to KOTCS, and then the props darken them, and then darken these more or whatever. But Joe Strain would always use whiskey with brandy knots, and I like that. And I have made a Jacka-esque whip before for somebody on spec, but I like to make what I call, basically, it's a Raiders. I try to make a nice thin handle, have a flare up right here. We'll get into that in a moment. But I basically make my version of a Raiders, but I just change the knots because I just really love the Raiders style, and I love those knots, and I don't really specifically model it off of Jacka's model, in a sense, maybe more Joe Strain's in a way. So with these, once again, just with the collars, this is how we usually get it. If you're checking out the website, if you wanted a Raiders, I'd expect you'd want this, a Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, but you can get a Raiders, in different colors, all these different colors. But let's go ahead and talk about the handles for a minute. So all these handles that you ever see on all these whips are made up of this 8-inch spike right here. All right, so this is a nail spike. All right, it's a pretty solid piece. Now, even though these handles, like this one, the LC always looks shorter than the rest, but it still has an 8-inch nail spike just like the others. All right, they're all made up on an 8-inch nail spike just like Morgan did. All right, now you can just make a standard Indy whip. You can just wait till the bellies flare out, put a knot above where the bellies flare out. We can talk about where the handle flares out a little bit because it gets thicker. That's where the bellies start to braid. And where the knot goes on, and you don't even have to put this at a certain height or this at a height or whatever. I mean, a lot of people just make Indy-style whips and try to get the general motif. As far as the Raiders, one of the whips used in the movie, there are a lot of whips used in the movie, but someone got a hold of it with calipers, and it just happened that David Morgan had a very thin bullwhip. And so they measured that the handle, or right here, was 22 millimeters around the thong, which is the thick part of it, right above it too, like 22. And I think this was 18 on the handle, but either way, so a lot of people are wanting, I want that 20, it's got to be 22. And if it's any fatter, it's not a Raiders from just one spec on one whip. And they try to say that there's, 13 diamonds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 or 13 diamonds shown. And they get really particular, but depending on how fat these are, slim these are when they're just cut out, and depending on what goes on, you may get 13, you may get 14. David never made it to be just like it. Just one of them happened to be 14, and one of them had to be a little slimmer than the other, and that was the one a guy measured. And so a lot of people say those are the Raiders specs. While that is technically could be considered one side of it, the others really weren't in the same exact measurements, but they're close. He still did his belly's high to the handle. Now, when you make a whip, you'll put a leather core on here, but you'll also make a belly, which is like 4 strands, and they braid. And they start, depending on where I start the belly braid, depends on where this, now because it's braided, doubles up in thickness. And so that's what we call like a handle flare. Like right here, let's see, I don't know if you can see it, but the handle right here under this knot is where they start to flare out, all right? Like flares right into that knot. And that's usually what you want to see to make that thin handle. And just right at the end of the handle where it's about that high point on that nail is where it flares out just enough to put a knot on. And that's what a lot of people think the Raiders knot or Raiders handle should look like. Now, I believe it was Bernardo Del Carpio that got a screenshot from the Temple of Doom. I may be wrong, but he saw a whip, and he saw that on one that they were using there. Once again, it was high up like the Raiders knot, but he saw that it was a little fatter for about, you know, like a transition knot underneath. It was fatter before it got there, so it didn't flare up around here. It flared up more down here. So not everyone bothers trying to hit these things, but since Bernardo made a, you know, got a picture, you know, and saw it and said, hey, I could obviously started earlier, I tend to do the same thing, and it just gives it a slight variation from the Raiders, to where it's the Raiders, but with the earlier swell. I know it's kind of hard to see this model, it's a slim handle, but it flares out more here instead of right there, you know, and that kind of gives it, once again, it has that high knot on the Raiders, but just a more of a fat section there. And then the LC, by this point, David, which is kind of he did here, by the time he made this whip into this whip, he just started changing his philosophy, and what he did is he realized that you can get a tighter transition, you know, easier if you start the belly braid farther down than up here, unless you cut the leather right, you know. And so he started making his belly start here instead of high up here. And so when the time it even got down to the LC, he was still doing the same thing he did kind of around the area he did the TOD, but he just, once again, the flare, the swells here, if you look at this, the swell's here. So I have the swell starting in the same spot on the LC and the TOD, but instead of putting this knot up here like the TOD, I just slide it down a little bit, right where the flares out, right before the knot, just like it does on the Raiders. So this tends to be what, you know, how the LCs were, and usually in the LC, these weren't that slim. From what I understand, they're a little thicker in here and a little chunkier in two, whatever the difference. So usually this handle almost kind of is nearly fat as that, but that's kind of what I do for these three models, is I try to say, okay, well, here's the Raiders from that one spec. I try to get it. I don't always try to hit 22 millimeters unless the customer wants it. I just let the leather does what it wants, but I try to make it so that it flares out right, but, you know, flares out on this nail somewhere around in here, so I can get the knot right there, a flare and a knot. This one, I do this, I start it more here, so it gets a flare a little earlier, but then again, it's still got the right spot to where the knot will be in the same spot as the Raiders. Once again, the LC, well, the flare starts down here, but once again, the knot's put right above it, so it doesn't go quite as high up. There's almost just like a knot difference, just like one transition knot lower. Now, these are just specs that I do. These are just how I like to do them, to give a little differential, because some people are like, I want this model or that model, and it's kind of good to give it. I think it was good, you know, Joe makes his model, he has little differences, but it's like that too. I think it's good to give a different option for the models to kind of classify the movies differently, you know, as opposed to just getting Raiders in whatever colors you want, but that works too. A lot of people do that too. Like if you look at this, like some people say, well, man, I want a Raiders, I love the look of the Raiders, I don't like the short handle. A lot of people say that. They do not like the short LC handle, but they like the Raiders look, but they want it all in whiskey to be an LC. So, I mean, you know, you can order it however you want, you know, whatever you want to do. Some people have certain things they want to see in every whip, like diameter. Some of the gearheads, they want certain diameter or certain diamond to show, or certain shape of a knot, and it's, you know, if you want that from a whip maker, ask him if he can do it for you. That's what I would just say. But, you know, for most of the part with that, you know, a good whip's a good whip. You know, to me, what you want from an Indy is you want to see that there's a slimmer handle than it is on the thong. It kind of flares out before the end of a whip. I want to see a good 5/4 knot where the wrist loop, you can see through the wrist loop. These aren't pinched in like some people do, you know, that are trying to learn. You know, you want to see that. You can see that nail spike head right there. You know, on every one of these, you can easily see that nail spike. I like to see that. I like to see that this is a sloppy neat where these kind of bunch up or overlap over each other, and it helps give the shelf of the knot. You know, as far as knots, some people make them fatter, some slim or whatever. You know, but I like to usually get these a little darker if possible. Most people want those a little darker, but knots are usually, if it's cut even from the same skin, these will be lighter than the whip. And then even if you condition a little, they'll go a little lighter, but this will, from hand sweat, will instantly catch up, and this will catch up too. This just didn't go through all the process the hide did, even though it's from the same hide, so sometimes it's a little lighter. But, you know, you want to see it's a 12 plat. It's got a nice taper. You want to see that it's a nice 6-point hitch. You know, I don't really care about the fall collars, but, you know, usually on the Raiders, people expect the natural. And, you know, kind of the same thing on the others, but generally when it goes to LC and it goes to KOTCS, I like a darker one. You know, I just prefer it. These are great, but they get pretty grimy pretty fast. So, you know, just from hitting in the grass and things. This is actually just as white as these. It's a different fall batch. I don't know if you can see that, but it's not as white. And that's just because the conditioner that got on it was some dubbing instead of some Trinity Whip Co. So it was just a little darker just from the conditioning. It's actually, and maybe the life of the hide. But I guess that's it. I just wanted to share some of these. So if you guys just want to see my opinion on it or what I do here Trinity Whip Company. This is kind of what I'm looking at. If you're wanting an Indy whip, you know, this is if you just ordered a Raiders or a TOD or an LC or a KOTCS, I would do this with them, just expecting that this is my, whoops, a little junk on it. This is what I call the variation of the model. And the reason I would generally make them like this from an order is because I kind of expect some of the Indiana Jones fanatics may believe these are the specs as through the years people have pulled up different things and said, hey, this one's like that, this is like that. That's how David is making them at that point. So I would tend to make them like this anyways, and then unless they, you know, when I talk to them, they actually say, I want this or I don't want that. But generally I would still make these specs. So if you're ordering, that's what you're looking at. It all comes down to, it's the same spike, it's just where it flares up, where you put the knot, but it's still relatively the same Indy action and the same Indy feel. So thanks for watching. Hope it's informative. Like I said, not every whip maker does the same thing. Joe Strain used to even have what he called a standard Indiana model, like a standard, what do you call it? The standard Indiana model or Indiana Jones model. He had a name for it, but he also had a 20th anniversary, which he tried to hit the Raider spec. But you have just like a standard Indy whip. So if you want to buy an Indy whip, you just say, you know, you just buy it and then pick the color you want. And he would just make a Indiana Jones theme style whip. I don't know if he would always bother making an LC or a TOD or this or that, less contacted. But when I did talk to him and send him some stuff, I'd send him a whip. I'm like, it's Raiders. The handle was a little low. So I'm like, it's a natural. It's Raiders when I was really off. And he's like, it was an LC and natural. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, the handle flare started earlier and the knot was high, or it wasn't as high up, and you know. So I think he likes to classify them from his own reasons too. Not everyone does it. You don't have to do it. There's a lot of good people that make whips that just kind of try to do their best to mimic an Indy whip. But rambled on long enough. Hope you have a wonderful day, and hope we get to see you guys someday out here. You know, if you guys know a customer of mine, or you're ever in the area, in Indiana, around Indianapolis, just hit me up, and I'm sure me and, you know, we can get a few guys together. I'd love to just hang out for a while or get to do some cracking whips. Always, Trinity Whip Company is always open to the public. So God bless, have a wonderful day, and hopefully I'll see you out there.